The next season of Off-Grid Christianity will commence on Friday, 4th of September. However, during our summer break, there will be another chance to hear classic episodes from 180 and counting podcasts. Hi, my name is Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who do or don't go to church, and for those that are disillusioned. On today's podcast is a lady who was a Member of Parliament from 1987 until 2010. She was also a member of the European Parliament for 7 months, ending 31st of January 2020. Ministerial roles included Employment Minister, Prisons Minister, and Under Secretary of State for Social Security. She has written She has written an autobiography where the title gives a nod to one of her great successes, Strictly Come Dancing. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to Off-Grid Christianity today, Anne Widdecombe. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today. Where are we speaking to you?
I'm in Devon.
Very nice part of the world.
Dartmoor, yeah.
No, very, very well indeed. Lovely part of the world. Right. As you know, we have 5 questions to ask you before we get into the main frame of it. So if you're sitting comfortably, fingers on the buzzers, no conferring, we shall start. Question 1, Anne. If you could invite anybody, and I mean anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, who would it be?
I think it would be Charles II.
Oh.
I think he would be a massively entertaining dinner companion for a start. He had a fund of stories, particularly about his escape after the Battle of Worcester, when he was hiding up the oak tree and Cromwell's soldiers were underneath. But there were moments during that escape when literally he missed Cromwell's forces by seconds, not even minutes, but seconds. So wonderful stories he could tell. But I also want to ask him if he did marry Lucy Walters. The consensus is that he did not, but the fact is he does refer to her as his wife on a couple of occasions. So I'd like to know that, and he's the only one who can answer that now.
Yeah, well, definitely, that's a great thing. And of course, what people might not know is that if you travel the length and breadth of England and you see some pubs that unfortunately are closing, quite a few of them are called the Royal Oak. And I believe that's where they got the title from. That's
exactly where they got the title from. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting that you want to ask those kind of questions, because if I had a chance of interviewing somebody alive or dead, I think I'd have to choose Winston Churchill, just to find out if there's anything that we don't know about yet from the Second World War.
I think you wouldn't find him quite as entertaining as Charles II.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think, yes, it would be a great fund of history, but I think it's more or less been done to death. I'm reading a book at the moment called Appeasing Hitler. By Tim Bouverie, which is looking at unpublished correspondence, which I always think is the best way now to do history, because all the formal state papers have been looked at, for heaven's sake. There's nothing new under the sun. But he's going into a lot of unpublished correspondence. Once somebody starts doing that, there's very little to be revealed. So I'd rather have Charles II, about whom there are still lots of questions, than Winston Churchill, about whom there are very few questions now.
Right. Well, in that case, then, I'm going to scrub Winston off my list, and I'll come up with someone better. Thank you. No, that's very good. Question 2, Anne. Who is your favourite biblical character, or favourite biblical story, or favourite parable?
Well, I'm going to go for, but not for the reasons you might suppose, I'm going to go for the Good Samaritan, because there is a hidden lesson in that parable that nobody ever seems to talk about, well, except me when I'm preaching in an Oxford chapel. Apart from that, nobody ever seems to talk about it, which is this: it's trust. It's the role played by trust. Because if you go to the end of that parable, the Good Samaritan gives the innkeeper money. And says, use this for this man's care. And when I'm next passing, and in biblical terms, don't forget that could have been a very long time. He's not whizzing up and down a motorway. When I'm next passing, I'll make it up to you if you use too much. Now, if you use more. Now, the man the innkeeper had to trust that the Good Samaritan really would come by and make up any difference. The Good Samaritan, in turn, had to trust that the innkeeper wouldn't chuck the man out as soon as the Good Samaritan had gone, that he wouldn't cheat him, that he wouldn't say he'd spent more if he hadn't. That he would use the money that he'd been given specifically for that man's care. There was trust. And there's precious little of it about today.
That's a great answer. Do you know what? I don't think I've heard that bit. I've heard the story many, many times, the parable. That's a great answer. Thank you. Oh, I'm buzzing already. Thank you. Well, this is the first time in all my years of asking this question that it could have actually been for you. If you were Prime Minister for the day and could change any law or impose a new law, Anne Widdecombe, what would it have been, or what would it be?
I would repeal the 1967 Abortion Act and the 1990 Abortion Act completely, so that we protected unborn life.
Because?
Because what we do at the moment is we destroy human beings. And it's solely because they can't be seen. Yeah. I mean, if we could see small babies, and when I say small babies, I'm being quite literal, because we have abortion up to birth in this country, which I think a lot of people don't realise. If we could see the little ones that are being taken in to be aborted, there'd be an uprising. But of course, you can't see them. Yeah. So it's out of sight, out of mind. And a lot of it is profoundly illogical. What is the difference with a child a couple of weeks before birth and a couple of weeks after birth? But the child a couple of weeks after birth has full human rights and full protection in law. And the child 2 weeks before has none.
Can we just clarify something there? Because, we often hear bandied around that it was, the limit was 24 weeks, but you're saying it's up to 2 weeks before birth?
No, I'm saying it's up to birth itself. Only in certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's 24 weeks is what is called the social limit. So you don't really even have to give reasons for having an abortion up to 24 weeks. You just don't want the child. And that is also illogical, because if you think about it, you can have two children side by side, exactly the same age, exactly the same gestation, and one is born prematurely and is in a secure unit where everybody is fighting like mad to save that child. And the other of exactly the same gestation is just taken from its mother's womb and disposed of. Mm-hmm. And the only difference is that the one is wanted and the other isn't. Now, that is immoral. So, yes, there is a 24-week limit for social abortion. But for the first time in 1990, we introduced abortion up to birth in this country. So if the child is handicapped, and by that I don't mean, profoundly so, it can be done for Down's children. Mm-hmm. And we had that famous court case recently where a Down's lady tried to say that this was discrimination, as indeed it can be done for Down's children. And it's either handicap or it's to if the mother's life is in danger. Well, the fact is, if the mother's life is in danger, you always would induce early, but you wouldn't seek to kill. Yeah. You'd induce with a view to having an early birth.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've asked this question several times down several episodes of this podcast, and the number of times this comes up as the number one. And I was chatting to, I suppose I can call him a friend, really. I've never met him. We email each other through a business thing that I was inquiring about, and he's decided to answer. So I thought, right, okay, have a listen to my podcast. You want to become a journalist, have a listen, see what you think. And he wrote back to me late last night saying that, he isn't a Christian. He would have done this, he would have done that. But he gave up when the person concerned said that they wanted to change the abortion law. And he said, that is so abhorrent to me. I'm so steaming ahead with it. I can't like this. So, what would you say to these people who don't want to listen, or are so with their mindset, like you are for your side? Their mindset is on the other side, where it's the right thing.
Well, it cannot be the right thing to kill. That can never be the right thing, and particularly when, as our laws allow, you can kill even when a child is viable. That is to say, could survive outside the womb. So that can never, ever be right. Now, to me, you open up a complete minefield when you try to decide where life starts. And the sort of people you're talking about say, well, it starts at birth. But as I say, you tell me the difference. A child 2 weeks before and a child 2 weeks after. There's no difference. There's absolutely no difference at all, except it hasn't happened to have arrived yet.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that. I said beforehand, I'm going to be nice to you. I'm not trying to be controversial at all. It's just really nice how you're answering these. Thank you. Question 4. Outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out so far, please, Anne?
I think it came in the earlier part of this century when I used to take my mother on cruises.
Oh, wow.
And we went to Iceland and Greenland. And my mother didn't because she wasn't up to it then, but I and a friend went up in a helicopter on top of a glacier.
Yeah.
Now, amazingly, it's infested with mosquitoes on top of the glacier. Couldn't believe it.
Wow.
But you have to wear a net. It's so bad.
Wow.
But that's obviously not what I enjoyed, not wearing a net against the mosquitoes. The thing I really, really loved was you stood there and you could hear the boom as a bit of ice broke up and you were just standing in what was effectively very, very unvisited territory.
Wow. That reminds me, because, you were high profile when you were an MP and you were getting on these holidays. What about security? How did you cope with that?
I never had security in my entire life, and I didn't need it.
Wow, that's good. What about all these people coming up to you saying, "Oh, I know you," and all that sort of stuff?
Oh, yeah, they do all the time. Absolutely all the time. And some will be quite rude, some. Not often. On the whole, we're very British and we pass by if we don't like the person concerned. But occasionally, yes, it does happen. But I've never felt. I remember once, we got a death threat in the office purporting to come from the IRA.
Yeah.
And my staff were in a tears and I said, come on, the IRA don't send you notice. They just do it. Throw it in the bin. And I think, nowadays everybody's terribly uptight about security, etc., etc. Frankly, if you go into that job and you're too fussed about your safety, it's a bit like going into the army and not wanting to get shot.
Yes. Well, you won't see me going into the army or into politics. We're both too old. Just the other side of the upper age limit, obviously. Question 5, Ad. What has been your most embarrassing moment to date, please?
Well, I think, you could say the entire of Strictly. I don't know. I never felt embarrassed. I always thought it was great fun, but other people seem to think I should feel embarrassed. But I think it's not an embarrassing moment. It's a rather funny moment, actually, but it was embarrassing for the person concerned. There's this great formality in Parliament where every day starts with the Speaker's procession. And the Speaker's in those days, wig as well, wig and gown. And he processes from his Speaker's house to the chamber. And he comes along a very long corridor called the library corridor. Then he comes up into the public lobby. And then he goes through the public lobby to members' lobby. And then he goes into the house and up to his chair. Now, it's a very long procession. And it's very formal. As I say, he's in his wig and gown. Behind him comes the mace bearer carrying the mace. Behind him comes the train bearer holding up his gown. Behind him comes the mace bearer. And then you've got the clerk of the Commons with his book, and they all walk in this long procession. And when they come into the public lobby, that's where members of the public are allowed to be, the policeman on duty calls out, "Hats off, strangers!" Well, of course, nobody wears a hat these days. But, of course, as soon as he calls that out, there's dead silence. Everybody's wondering, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
And on one occasion, when the policeman had just called, "Hats off, strangers," a Labour MP came out of the members' lobby and he saw Neil Kinnock in the distance and he wanted to attract his attention. And he called out, "Neil!" And everybody did.
And that's a true story.
Well, it's a true story that I think has probably gained a few edges over the years. But yes, it was basically a true story.
Oh, that is brilliant. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Well, I'll tell you what. Thank you so much for those answers so far. You mentioned politics and the member of the opposition. And, of course, you were in opposition as well for some time. But Jack Straw, the reason why I'm mentioning Jack Straw is that apparently he's a Christian as well, but how did you cope when you're like talking about really important things, such as, women prisoners, and Jack Straw was against it, you were for it. And then like a few weeks later or a couple of days later, you might meet up, in the chambers for a time of prayer. How did you cope with members of the opposition who were also going to be Christians?
I mean, people often ask this. They say, do you ever talk to members of the opposition?
Yeah.
You have a drink with them? For heaven's sake, it would be unbearable in the House of Commons if you carried political arguments into sort of personal relationships. I'm one of my best friends in Parliament. I had two really, really good friends. One was the late Sir David Amos, who was sadly murdered. But the other was David Alton, who is a Liberal Democrat MP. And we got to know each other because we worked together on his abortion bill in the late 80s. And we've remained friends. I'm godmother to one of his children.
Oh, wow.
He was one of my sponsors when I was received into the Catholic Church. We get on like a house on fire until we talk politics. And then it's the end. And you just accept that. People are human beings. They see things differently. It is only very recently that we've got this sort of intolerant attitude, that if you hold a view that other people don't hold, you shouldn't be heard, you should be cancelled, as they say.
Yes. David Alton had the pleasure, this goes back in my UCB days, going down to interview him in Houses of Parliament. And I remember his little office. It was up a stairway, and it was not bigger than a broom cupboard. It was so small, and he was explaining that how many ever MPs they had in those days. Everyone needed an office, and that was his office. And then he took me into the House of Commons itself, and peering down, I'll tell you how long ago it was, because William Hague was the Secretary of State for Wales.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And about 20 people in there, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm in a chamber, and I'm seeing the spontaneity going on. It was fantastic. What do you remember about spontaneity when you were there and you had to get up on your feet and speak straight away?
Oh, well, you very often do. I remember one nightmare of an occasion when I was the pensions minister. And there was a small measure on national insurance. And it was supposed to take 5 minutes before the end of the day at 10 o'clock. So I was there ready. And I got a message from the whip saying, get into the chamber immediately. And the previous business was collapsing. So I had this small measure, which should have taken about 5 minutes, and I had to keep going for an hour. Well, on those occasions, the whips are wonderful. They get everybody in the chamber to stand up and interrupt and ask questions and interventions and all the rest of it.
Right.
And I sort of said very tendentiously, I mean, a firmer speaker, I think, would have said, you can't do that. I said, now, let us just look for a moment at the history of this and how it's, and this sort of rot. And I didn't talk rot, but I talked irrelevancy for about 50 minutes out of the hour that I had.
Wow. That's classic filibustering, isn't it?
Well, in a way, that is filibustering because normally when you're filibustering, you're trying to talk something out. You're trying to ensure it doesn't happen. With me, it was a question of the previous business had collapsed early, and I just had to get up to when everybody would be coming in for the votes.
And you did.
And I did.
Oh, brilliant. Am I right in saying, Anne, and the reason for asking this, and it's not to catch you out at all.
Yeah.
You were part of the Northern Ireland office under John Major, am I right?
No, you're wrong. I've never been either in shadow or in office in Northern Ireland. Never in either of the two. I don't quite know why you might have got that impression.
Oh, I should check my resources on that one and send the minions out to sort it out. But you were at the time, though, involved, obviously, backstage, knowing what was going on. What do you remember of the peace process, the times leading up to peace process, Good Friday Agreement?
Well, I'm always slightly irritated because people tend to say it was Tony Blair who got the peace in Northern Ireland. Actually, it was John Major. It was John Major who started the whole ball rolling and who decided that, yes, we were going to talk to the IRA. Now, that may sound to you quite obvious, but the line that Thatcher had always taken was, we don't deal with terrorists. They're common murderers. We do not talk to the IRA. John Major recognised that if you're going to have a peace process, you've got to involve both sides. Otherwise, you might just as well not bother. So he did start, the government started talking to the IRA very carefully to start with. But of course, we couldn't say that was what was going on. Indeed, most of us didn't even know, this was known to very few people, what was going on. And there was some sort of challenge to John to say, will you talk to the IRA? And he said no. And later, later, some members of the Labour Party tried to make trouble over that. And the public, the press, and indeed the Labour front bench just said, stop it. We got a peace process. And it went well. It went well.
Yeah,
and Blair built on that. And I was really very saddened when Blair made his statement in the House of Commons. I was there when he made it on the peace agreements. Didn't give any credit to John at all. And I thought that was very petty and mean-minded of him.
Well, thank you for setting that straight. I had the privilege last week of interviewing Martina Purdy, who was the BBC political correspondent for Northern Ireland until about 10 years ago, when she then became a nun. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing her, and she was talking about the peace process and the signing of the forms and everything else like that. And it was incredible to hear from her side of the story, together also with a lady called Linda Gould, who was a Presbyterian working through the Troubles as well. From 1998 onwards to now, what do you think about the peace process and how's it going?
Well, we've got peace on the mainland, certainly. And Northern Ireland is much more peaceful than it was. You and I both lived through the Troubles. We know exactly what it was like. It was an incident a day, pretty well, and including some very, very big, nasty ones. I myself missed the Brighton bomb by about 20 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'd been drinking in the bar. Well, I was much younger in those days. I'd been drinking in the bar with some fellow candidates, and we were all very ambitious. And about 20 to 3 in the morning, I said, well, I thought I was going off to bed. I'm sure they regarded me as a fuddy-duddy. But I went off, and the bomb went off 20 minutes later. And those of my friends who'd stayed at the bar were caught in it. They were okay. I think one of them had dust inhalation, but apart from that, they were okay. But of course, I lost a good friend in the bomb. So I missed that by 20 minutes. So for us, the point I was making, I get rather rambly now, the point I was making was we know exactly, what the Troubles were like. And you haven't got anything like that now. So from that point of view, the peace process was successful. Unfortunately, that process and the Good Friday Agreement have been used in the course of the Brexit negotiations to try and unravel Brexit. And to my mind, it was always a big distraction because there is a border. We know where the EU ends and where the UK begins. Mm-hmm. And you do not need a hard border. You don't need to go back to policing the border as such. But knowing where it is, we could have done by technological surveillance and all the rest of it, checked on stuff that was going over the border and as to whether it had registered the right documents, etc. We could have done all of that. And I think that is what we should have insisted on, instead of which they created a fresh border down the Irish Sea. And, it's threatening the Union itself. And I am furious with Boris for ever agreeing that. And so I think now the Good Friday Agreement is being used as a political football instead of doing what it was designed to do, which is to keep the peace, and which it's very successfully done.
Mm-hmm. We'll still clear the rest of that. I think wisdom dictates, because but thank you for sharing that. Obviously, I'd like to talk more about your faith, if that's okay, because I want to encourage those listening today who, as I said right at the very beginning, they might be disillusioned despite everything that's going on in their lives and thinking, well, where is God? For everything that you've gone through, and you've already alluded to some things, what does your faith mean to you these days, Anne?
Well, when people say, where's God? I always wonder what they expect this earth to be. It's not meant to be heaven. Really is not meant to be heaven. It's a preparation for the same, but this earth is a vale of tears. It's the valley of the shadow of death. It's not supposed to be. God is not supposed to be a benign grandfather who makes everything all right as soon as he's applied to. I think sometimes we tend to treat him, and I include myself in this. Some sort of performing magician, who will just sort of whisk away all the difficulties. And the way we talk to him in church, grant world peace. Oh yeah. Grant world peace, as if, the earth isn't populated by sinful human beings. And the bit I always quote is not actually the Bible. I don't know whether you've ever seen it. Very famous film called Hacksaw Ridge.
Yes, Mel Gibson.
Yes. Was it Mel? I don't know. But Desmond Doss, who is the hero of Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss rescued 75 people. He was a non-combat medic. He was a conscientious objector who was a medic.
Yeah.
And he rescued 75 people. Now, the bit I quote is this. Every time, and this is not fiction from the film, this is fact, he says it himself, every time he got one more to the ridge and let him down, he prayed to God, just let me get one more.
He did.
Just let me get one more. Not, oh God, spare all those, none of that stuff. Let me get one more. And there were two things there, I think. First, it was a very specific prayer. But secondly, he was asking God's blessing on something he was doing. So let me get one more. And so he went on until he brought out 75. And there were no more to bring out, as far as I know, anyway. And we don't do that. We don't say, bless the efforts of some aid worker in Syria or something. We say grant world peace.
Yes.
Now, I think and if you actually look at the Bible, they don't pray in those terms in the Bible. They pray very, very specifically. Christ didn't walk through the Holy Land saying, let all lepers be cured. He dealt with particular ones who came to him. And I just think we need to get an idea of what this earth is about. And I say that when I myself, we all do it, don't we? We all just ask God to put everything right. We do. Yeah. It's human nature to do that. But sometimes what we've got to do is try and put it right ourselves and ask his blessing on our efforts, which is different.
Yeah. I'm going to try and redeem myself here. I think Mel Gibson was the director of the film.
Right. It could well be. Could well be. But I know he didn't play Desmond Doss. I can see Desmond Doss in my mind's eye, and it wasn't Mel Gibson.
It definitely wasn't. I should remember it was. I think it was an English actor.
I can't remember, but he was very, very good, whoever he was. But the story itself, which apparently was itself filleted because Mel or whoever was directing didn't think viewers would believe it. So some of the more miraculous events were actually taken out.
Oh, really?
Yes, to keep it credible to us mortals on this earth.
Wow. So let's go right back to the beginning of your Christian faith, that's right. And how did you become a Christian? When did you become a Christian, please?
Well, look, evangelicals always say, there's an exact moment of conversion. You ask the Lord into your heart and that's it.
Yeah.
And I went through allegedly such a process when I was about 8 years old. I had an evangelical vicar for a brother, and he took me to an evangelical meeting in Tunbridge Wells and asked me at the end, did I want to ask the Lord into my heart? Well, what does a child say in those circumstances? I said, yeah. And so that is pointed to. I don't believe that at all. I think that, it can happen that way. It did with some. But I also think it can happen so gradually as to be imperceptible. And I always adduce that argument because I became an agnostic and then came back to Christianity. And there was no flash in the night. There was no great sort of event. I became an agnostic through a gradual erosion of belief.
Yes.
And I came back to Christianity through a gradual erosion of unbelief. So that one day I might have said I was an agnostic, the next day I might have said I was Christian, the next day I might have said I was an agnostic. It's a very, very slow and sometimes imperceptible process. And I've never subscribed to the view that there has to be a moment that you can point to. I don't think it works like that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Actually, I can't remember the date, but I do remember eventually one night reluctantly sitting on the staircase and say, okay, then come into my life, Jesus, that sort of stuff. And what resonated with me was short time afterwards, I was reading a C.S. Lewis book, and C.S. Lewis himself said he went to bed that night the most despondent of all Christians, because nothing happened. I didn't have the fireworks either. So I know what exactly you mean. You mentioned your brother.
Yes.
Tell me more about him, please, because we do have a tenuous link here.
Yes, he was Canon Malcolm Widdecombe. He went to theological college in Bristol, and one of the churches that he was assigned to during his curacy, he then took over as the priest in charge. He wasn't granted the living immediately because that church was scheduled for closure.
Are we talking about St. Philip and Jacob here? We're
talking about St. Philip and St. Jacob in Bristol.
Yes.
And that church was scheduled for closure, and he was just there to sort of see it through. Well, he took a completely different view, and his motto was seek first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. So we didn't try fundraising. We didn't have a barometer outside the church showing how much had been donated, how much you still had to go. Didn't do anything like that. He gave away the church's funds to missions. Seek first the kingdom of God. He gave the money away. And the net result of all of this was that he got an evening congregation of 200, which had been about 20, and the church was saved from closure. And it went from strength to strength. It became one of the biggest evangelical churches for miles around. A lot of students used to come from Bristol University. And it became quite famous in its time. But it was founded on this one principle, seek first.
Wow.
So he gave the money away at a time when, most vicars or priests in charge would have been trying to get the money in, gave it away.
Yeah. I was chatting to a vicar friend of mine only a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I'll be interviewing you. He said, oh, I used to know her brother.
Yeah.
So here's a quote, and I assume it to be correct, is that apparently your brother didn't believe in purgatory. Is that right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, he wasn't a Catholic. I'm a Catholic. Yeah.
And he said, so when my vicar friend Martin, what's his name is Martin, said to him, I take it you don't believe in purgatory, Malcolm. He said, no, I do, because I went to theological college.
That's quite likely. Yeah, that is quite likely. He hated it because he wasn't interested in theory. He had to have these qualifications, but he wasn't interested in theory. He wasn't interested in the abstruse side of church history. He wasn't interested in that. He just wanted to get out and work for the Lord. And therefore, it took him rather longer at theological college than it should have done. He had to have an extra year.
Wow. So I suppose that basically means that all these talks that we had in the 80s and 90s, and I'll say why this in a minute, about premillennialism, postmillennialism, all these amillennialisms, and all these tribulations and stuff that people thought were very, very important. Malcolm would have said, not interested in that, and he would just torn it up. Would I be right in saying that?
He was interested in just working for the Lord. That was all he cared about. He didn't care about theory. He never had an academic approach to theology. Never. He was interested solely in, you might say, getting on with it.
Yeah. Well, on Monday night, just gone, and the interview is going to be going out. I have to make sure it goes out before yours now. Sarah Billups from America has just written an amazing book where she talks about the 80s and 90s and all these conversations that most probably helped destroy people's faith and everything else. And so it's from her point of view. But one thing she did say, you become an evangelical, you will then become an Anglican, and later you'll become a Catholic. And I said, yeah. What do you mean by that? And she said, well, you said, because basically more and more people in Church of England or the Anglican Church or the Episcopalian in America, like more of the liturgy and stuff like that. So for her to say that, I thought, can't wait to ask Anne, because, you went from...
I literally did, yeah.
Yeah. Please tell me more about why you went through that process.
Right, the final straw was the ordination of women, and it wasn't so much even the ordination of women. It was the debate that surrounded it. And the debate wasn't about, is this theologically possible? It was all about, if we don't do this, we won't appeal to the wider world. And I thought, hang on, hang on, the duty of the church is to lead, not follow. But that was the last straw. There was already a huge bundle of straw. My big mistake was when I was coming back from agnosticism, I should have gone to Rome then. Because when I looked at the churches from afar, I came to realize that Rome regarded truth as truth and immutable. And the Church of England regarded truth as, completely changeable to suit whatever circumstances there were. And tried to fill its pews basically by sacrificing creed to compromise. I mean, that was what it came down to. And so I left the C of E. Now, interestingly, my brother, who was an evangelical and certainly didn't believe in half the Catholic canon, my brother came to my service of reception into the Catholic Church and actually participated on the altar in his robes. And that was an endorsement because he too was thoroughly disillusioned with the Church of England. But he had nowhere to go. He had an enormous flock. He wasn't going to come to Rome because he didn't accept half the doctrine. So what was he to do? And 348 priests left the C of E at that time, and a small handful of bishops, and a member of the royal family, about 5 members of parliament, were leaving at that time because they were all similarly, I think, wanting a church that said truth is truth. And although it hadn't come out by then, within a couple of years of my being accepted into the Roman Catholic Church, we had the papal, whatever it's called. I almost said papal bull. That's going back several centuries. Encyclical was the word I was looking for.
Good word.
We had a papal encyclical called Veritatis Splendor, the shining of truth. And its thesis was what had drawn me into the Catholic Church, although it hadn't then been published. Its thesis was something can be enormously popular, but deeply wrong, and something can be profoundly unpopular, but right. And what you have to do is look at right and wrong, truth and falsehood, not at what goes down well. And the Church of England does the exact opposite.
I suppose you can.
It's embroiled in a discussion now as to whether we should say our Father, and politically incorrect. Come on.
Yeah, it's as if you're trying to appease the masses.
Yeah,
just to get votes.
And they don't come into church. You don't get them as a result of that. And this is what the Church of England doesn't seem to understand. There are 2 growing churches in the world. One is the Catholic Church. One's the evangelical. And why? Because they both say this is truth. They don't mess.
So I take it then that your brother might have been a little bit miffed, but not very miffed.
He wasn't at all miffed. He was on my side completely.
Wow. That's brilliant. Hence, I suppose, a quote here that I found from a very well-known person. Might be looking at that person right now. For years, I had been disillusioned by the Church of England's compromising on everything. The Catholic Church doesn't care if it is unpopular.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, going back to the 1980s,
yes.
One of the big questions thrown at me when I first became a Christian. So I'd love to hear your vote, your thought on this. I'm going to sit well back just in case. And you've most probably heard this several times. You can't be a Christian and a Catholic. What would you say to that?
Well, it is complete nonsense. As far as the Catholics are concerned, we were all Catholics until the Reformation. Yeah. So it is a nonsense to say you can't be a Christian and a Catholic. I need to hear why the 2 are supposed to be incompatible before I can answer, because I could be answering 100 different questions. But as far as I'm concerned, our Lord founded his church when he said, thou art Peter, and upon this rock, Hanc Petram, that you are Peter Petrus, and upon this rock I will found my church, and I will give you the keys, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And he went on to say, whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now that to me is a very, very clear authority to Peter and to the early church. And from that we stand. Now, if you want me to say that the Catholic Church has always been a force for good, patently, obviously, it wasn't. The Catholic Church, like all other collections of human beings, went through a stage of extreme corruption. And even by the standards of the time, and you've always, we talk about the Borgias, for example, but you could look at the standards of the time.
Yeah.
But even by the standards of the time, was just simply not right. And I welcome the Reformation as being a good thing, but I also believe that it would have come within the course of the next 50 to 100 years anyway. And the rather violent way it was done didn't help. Slaughter of the Anabaptists, for example.
Yes. And we've talked about that in a previous episode as well, about the Anabaptists as well. Going back to your political career, if that's all right, Anne.
Yeah.
Where did you see Jesus or God turn up in your life to take you through a situation that you thought there's going to be, problems ahead? Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, one of the worst things I ever had to do in Parliament, I denounced Michael Howard, who had been the Home Secretary, over his treatment of the head of the prison service, Derek Lewis. Now, that may not sound much to anybody just listening to this, but if you attack members of your own side, you really do become a bit of a pariah.
Yeah.
And the event that I was taking him to task over had actually happened 18 months earlier. But I hadn't been able to say anything because I was minister in the department. It was collective responsibility. But I'd always said, when this is over, by which I meant the election, when this is over, I am going to say everything I know. And nobody who was my friend, people like David Amos, David Orton, nobody wanted me to do it. But I decided I would do it. And I remember sitting there in the House of Commons. I mean, the press had been going mad over it for a week. I remember sitting there in the House of Commons and the Speaker called my name. And I thought, I really don't want to do this. And as I stood up, I was saying to myself in my head, I was saying, Lord, see me through this. And suddenly a huge beam of sunshine came through the window. Yeah. And I thought, thanks. Then I knew it was the right thing.
Wow. And then what happened?
Well, I obviously had to leave the front bench. You can't attack somebody on your own side from the front bench. I had to leave the front bench. I spent a year out of either office, well, obviously not office because we weren't in power, but I spent a year out of shadow office. And then I came back. And really that speech, which was known as something of the night, although that was a phrase I didn't use in the speech, I used it in some press comment. That phrase more or less put me on the map. And I had a year of really quite an interesting year, doing an awful lot in the media.
Yes. COVID, especially. You've seen we've come through it. Unfortunately, many people died from it. But from where I'm coming from here, I see quite a few people now just giving up going to church, as if they're hanging on by their fingernails to God. Where do you see the UK in particular with regards to the Christian faith, and where's it going?
Well, first of all, I thought the churches let down their flocks during COVID. The government said close the churches, and they closed. My view is that we should have defied the government. Now, we could have brought in, all manner of measures. I'm not saying we shouldn't have done that, but we should have kept the churches open so that people could go in individually to pray. And if there are lots of pews between you and the next person praying, as there would be if people were just going in individually, then, there was no danger at all. And I thought the churches should have taken a much stronger line and should have said, you lay down the criteria, oh government, but we're staying open. You can tell us how many people can be in a church at a given time. You can tell us that they must wear masks. Obviously, you can tell us this, that, and the other thing, but we're staying open. That's what the churches should have done. No, they didn't. They shut. And although the Catholic Church complained, it still obeyed the law, which you might expect.
Yeah, but
I thought there should have been a much tougher response from the churches. So, if they weren't going to be open at the very time when people were likely to be seeking God, we know that after 9/11, church congregations swelled because people were trying to make sense of it, and yet the churches were closed. And I don't blame people for losing confidence in the church as a result of that.
Was it deliberate, do you think? A deliberate ploy because they wanted to get Christianity out of the UK? Maybe?
Oh, no, I don't think there was any conspiracy theory like that at all. I think, the government just decided everything had to shut, and because churches had lots of people in them in one go, if you remember, funerals were limited to 15 people, etc. But you see, that is fine. They didn't prevent funerals, they just said there are limits. And I didn't want them to say the churches can do absolutely anything they like. What I wanted them to say was the churches will stay open, here are the rules.
Yes.
And what's wrong with that?
Yes. What do you think the government have learnt from all this?
Oh, probably nothing. I was against, let me come clean, I was against the lockdowns. I was against universal lockdowns. I thought we should have locked down the vulnerable and the very elderly and told everybody else it was their duty to keep the economy going. Instead of which we crashed the economy. We're now all paying for it, including the poor and the vulnerable. Everybody's now paying for this. We crashed the economy and didn't stop COVID spreading. And so I was never, ever in favour of universal lockdowns. There were other measures I thought were perfectly sensible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had a pleasure. Someone sent me, not Hansard. What's the medical journal that goes out?
The Lancet.
Thank you, the Lancet. And someone sent me an article written by a GP from Northern Ireland, and basically what she was saying was that it was like a row of dominoes, and all the countries were lined up like dominoes, and they're all looking to see ahead as to what the next country was doing. And it all goes back to the first country was saying, well, how's China dealing with it? Oh, they're going in lockdown, so therefore we go. Would that be a fair comment?
I think it was an act of political cowardice. I think the government thought if we don't lock down and this spreads like wildfire, we the government, are going to be blamed. And I think governments not just our government, governments across the world thought that, we must be seen to be doing everything we can because if we don't, we'll be blamed. Rather than, as they did in Sweden, with Anders Tegel, ask not what absolutely every last thing can we do, but what is effective? What should we be doing that's effective? And they didn't suffer any more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you for answering that as well. Meanwhile, back in the UK, where do you see the Christian country going as far as the faith?
Well, it's not much of a Christian country at the moment. I mean, it's very, very tenuous. And I should be interested to see what the coronation is like. Because, yes, I'm all for including everybody, but, the coronation is about the governor of the Church of England as well as the monarch. And whatever I may think of the Church of England, it nevertheless is the symbol of Christianity in this country. And so I would be very interested to see what happens. But I always say this. It's no good moaning and groaning about the decline of Christianity in this country, because ultimately it isn't up to the government, it isn't up to the Church of England, it isn't up to some archbishop somewhere, not even up to the papal nuncio. It's actually up to Christians themselves. And how did Christianity ever spread? Well, the early church, the early Christians took out the message. They didn't wait around for somebody else to do it. They took out the message. Yeah. And that's what we're not doing as Christians. And if we don't stand up for ourselves, we don't spread the good news, if we don't, show what we believe, why on earth do we expect anybody else to do it for us? Or why do we expect God to bless our non-efforts?
No, exactly. I mean, it's like you were saying, you were 1 minute an agnostic, the next minute you were thinking go back to Christianity, then an agnostic again. If you could have your time back and speak to yourself, what would you say about getting out of the agnosticism earlier? What would you have said?
Oh, I wouldn't. I was quite prepared, for it to happen as it did, which was naturally, by degrees, but very, very certainly. And that's the whole point. Very, very certainly it happened. And I don't regret that period, because I think that, without fear, you don't need courage. Without doubt, you don't need faith. And without some sort of challenge to what you think, you never actually rethink your position. So I don't regret that period particularly. I never have.
That's good. That's good. I'm very thin-skinned. Obviously, you're thicker skinned than me when it comes to criticisms and stuff. How did you handle the press and all their sniping at you? Not just going at Michael Howard, but other things as well.
I think you handle the press in different ways depending on what's happening. I vividly remember at one point they christened me Doris Karloff. So one day my secretary pressed the intercom and she said, I forget which one it was, say the Daily Mail on the phone for you. So I took the call, and before the man could say anything, I said, hello, Karloff speaking. And that is the way you deal with it, as you would with bullying. That's the way you deal with it. You join in, you laugh, it loses its sting. When they were criticising me for things I hadn't done, I used to get pretty miffed, but it was an occupational hazard. To go back to an analogy I used earlier, it's like sort of saying, well, I want to be a soldier, but I don't want any bullets to come in my direction. If you want to be a politician, you're going to get the bullets, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, talking of bullets and what's going on in Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
Where do you see it ending up?
I think this is only going to be solved when Putin finally goes, and I think Putin is ill. But I think that's the only way this is going to be sorted. He has too much face to lose, and now we're at the pitch where there's nothing really we can offer him. In the very, very early stages of Ukraine, we might have said, what can we offer Putin that will save him some face but keep Ukraine safe? What can we say? We're past that stage now. It's a bit like fighting Hitler. You reach a stage where absolutely no compromise is possible. And I think we're at that stage now. And only by the West supplying Ukraine with arms can they resist Putin. And I think they've got to go on resisting Putin until either the Russians have enough themselves, and there's plenty of signs that public opinion there is changing, until the Russians have enough, until Putin goes for whatever reason. I don't know, but what I do know is this. I see no way at all of a short-term solution. We're in for the long run on this. I'm afraid so. I'd love to say the opposite.
Yeah.
But, Zelensky knows it, and I know it, and everybody knows it, but, there is no quick solution tomorrow morning.
Yeah. And, of course, there's the argument as well that Mr. Putin has put round himself all his yes men, and that some of those could be even worse than him as well. So even if they did take out Putin, you might get someone twice as bad.
I don't think that would actually happen, at least. I mean, you might get somebody twice as bad, but I don't think it would happen with regard to Ukraine. I mean, Putin thought Ukraine was going to be a quick legacy, that he'd be able to go in and overrun it in, if not in minutes, in days, or certainly in a few weeks, not months and years. And that's what he thought. It was a quick legacy. It isn't. Any successor will recognise that, and will take advantage of the change to say, what can we do over Ukraine? It won't be a straightforward case of them saying, well, we're going tomorrow morning. It'll then be a long negotiation. But I don't actually think that will happen. He is surrounded by yes men. He is surrounded by people who are utterly loyal to him. And that, I'm afraid, is just something we have to recognise. But where I think hope lies is amongst the Russian people, because when this business began, huge swathes of the Russian people were right behind Putin. They thought this was the right thing to do. Now, gradually, as the body bags have come back and, social media has pointed out what's going on, opinion is changing. You've got young men fleeing the Russian borders to try and get out of the draft.
Yeah.
You've got people now who've seen their sons come back in body bags. It's different. The opinion is changing. And that is crucial, because when public opinion changes, eventually there is change at the top.
Yeah. One final question before we get to the final question. I sound a bit like Paul there from the Bible, St. Paul from the Bible. So we can wrap it up. What would you say then if people say, oh, yeah, well, you call yourself a Christian, Anne, but look at all the people that are dying in Ukraine and Russia on the borders. Where's God in all this?
Well, that comes back to the very question you asked right at the beginning. Where's God? And as I said, this earth is not meant to be heaven. And I'm as guilty as anybody. As I said earlier, of expecting God just to magic away problems. You know, I'm just as guilty as anybody else of asking him to sort things out.
Yeah.
But I quoted Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss, just one more, Lord, just one more. And I think we ought to get in that mode of thinking.
And thank you so much for sharing all that. The final question then is, before I say cheerio to you, it's something that I always do. I ask our guests to choose the hero as someone who's not in the Bible and definitely dead, so that, you know, in years to come we can't go and say, oh yes, but have you heard what such and such did subsequently? So,
sorry, hang on. Good job. This is a podcast and not a open air broadcast.
Yes,
isn't
it? Do you know what? I might keep that in. Just the phone call going.
Right. Well, the hero.
Right. Let me just introduce you again. Right. Thank you for that phone call. So, Anne Widdecombe, it's been a sheer pleasure to talk to you today and listen. More importantly, who is your Christian hero, please?
I think my Christian hero is Teresa of Avila. Saint Teresa of Avila, for this reason, that when she was on a journey of good works and helping God, her boat turned over, and she emerged, and instead of saying, "Thy will be done," she said, "Oh God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them." Good for Teresa.
Tell us more about Teresa, please.
Well, there's not a very great deal to tell. That's the bit that always stands out in my mind and the bit that I always quote. And of course, Teresa of Avila is very often muddled up with Teresa of Lisieux. And they were two completely different people. And these days, of course, we've got Mother Teresa of Calcutta, whom I could quite easily have nominated. Yeah. But I'll tell you somebody else I might have nominated, but I didn't. Phyllis Bowman, who for decades ran the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children.
Yes.
And Phyllis never gave up. She never gave up. It didn't matter what parliamentary reverses we had. It didn't matter what went wrong. She just kept going the next day. And she took a vow that she would give up drink until we had managed to reverse aspects of the 1967 abortion bill. And she gave up drink from that point. And she never had another drink.
Wow. And
when she was getting a bit elderly, I used to say, look, we've got to get some progress on this because I want Phyllis to have a drink before she dies. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Phyllis Bowman. In fact, okay, I'm afraid Teresa of Avila might have to take second place, but I do like that blunt talking to God. And it was from the heart. Yeah. And I think they would have laughed up there.
Yeah, and how many years ago are we talking about for St. Teresa?
Oh, you're going back centuries.
Yeah, brilliant. Anne Widdecombe, it's been a privilege, and I really do mean a privilege to listen to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers. God bless.
Have a lovely summer holiday. Enjoy the classic podcasts, and we'll catch up with you again for a new episode from Friday, the 4th of September. Until then, cheerio.